Robby, what's on your radar?
Well, confirmation hearings for Supreme Court nominee Ketanji Brown Jackson are underway. Yesterday, the would-be justice was grilled by Republican and Democratic members of the Senate Judiciary Committee. We've already discussed some of those questions, but I wanted to focus on one particular line of criticism Brown Jackson received, that she is an adherent of critical race theory. Indeed, tying Brown Jackson to critical race theory appears to be a major Republican strategy for opposing her nomination. The GOP tweeted this gif yesterday. The Libertarian Party Twitter account made fun of this line of attack, responding that the GOP was essentially claiming that everything I don't like is CRT. Certainly feels that they're claiming that at various times. But before we go any further, let me refresh your minds about what critical race theory actually is. So CRT is an academic tradition and approach which posits that racism is the central framework for understanding the modern world. It is relevant to instruction in the law because the theory's originators, people like Kimberly Crenshaw, a law professor at Columbia and UCLA, were lawyers and legal educators, and they were particularly focused on how racism undergirds U.S. law. So thus, it would not be surprising, actually, if CRT was an important part of Brown Jackson's training and philosophy. In fact, I would have expected her to have encountered it. But when asked about CRT by Democratic Senator Chris Coons, she said this.
In your 9 years in the bench and more than 570 decisions, have you ever used, employed, relied upon critical race theory to determine the outcome of any case or to impose any sentence or as a framework for your decision making?
No, Senator.
Would you just explain to us briefly what sort of factors you do, in fact, consider in your analysis?
So that was a pretty definitive answer. No. Republican Senator Ted Cruz followed up. Let's watch that.
What does critical race theory mean? What is it?
Senator, my understanding is that critical race theory is it is an academic theory that is about the ways in which race interacts with various institutions. It doesn't come up in my work as a judge. It's never something that I've studied or relied on, and it wouldn't be something that I would rely on if I was on the Supreme Court.
Cruz didn't quite believe what he was hearing, and so he kept hammering her.
Do you think that's an accurate way of viewing society and the world we live in?
Senator, I don't think so, but I've never studied critical race theory, and I've never used it. It doesn't come up in the work that I do as a judge.
So with respect, I find that a curious statement because you gave a speech in April of 2015 at the University of Chicago in which you described the job you do as a judge. And you said sentencing is just plain interesting because it melds together myriad types of law, criminal law, and of course, constitutional law, critical race theory. So you described in a speech to a law school what you were doing as critical race theory. And so I guess I would ask, what did you mean by that when you gave that speech?
With respect, Senator, the quote that you are mentioning there was about sentencing policy. It was not about sentencing. I was talking about the policy determinations of bodies like the Sentencing Commission when they look at a laundry list of various academic subjects.
So Brown Jackson's response didn't really explain why, if she was never influenced by or interested in CRT, or indeed barely even knew what it was, well, why she had cited it in that instance. By the way, it's been established that Brown Jackson was familiar with and had praised Derek Bell, an American lawyer and activist who is known primarily for his contributions to critical race theory. She gave a speech citing him at the University of Michigan Law School's MLK Day lecture. With respect to Brown Jackson, even giving her the benefit of the doubt, I think it's flatly unbelievable that CRT has played no role whatsoever in her judicial decision-making. She clearly knows what it is and has drawn some inspiration from it. Now, that doesn't mean the concept completely dominates her thinking or she's indistinguishable from one of the more obnoxious anti-racist educators like Ibram X. Kendi or Robin DiAngelo, but Supreme Court nominees should tell the truth about where they're getting their ideas. So what did you make of this?
It was a little strange, and to me it was sort of a microcosm, actually, of the Democratic Party's response to all of these controversies writ large. Like, you have two, when you get accused of having a particular position, you can either defend it,
right?
You can clarify what it is and then defend it, or you can say this thing doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And Democrats generally, and not just on this issue, are just going with the "this thing doesn't exist."
And this was a really weird case to go with the "this thing doesn't exist" because many Democrats have said that critical race theory is not being taught in schools.
Just in law
And then
schools.
I respond that, okay, what was literally called critical race theory is not really being taught in schools, but the ideas that have inspired some of these more very obnoxious kind of training seminars that treat like all white people as the devil, and that ascribe to black people characteristics that are very groupthinky and just very bad educational seminar stuff that I think is objectionable and does not belong in schools, doesn't belong anywhere. You don't have to call that critical race theory, whatever you want to call it, fine. But if you want to say that's not critical race theory, okay. But the people saying that's not critical race theory, right, what they've said is that critical race theory is taught in law schools and is only about this one thing. So she was going way too far. Like, I don't believe that she barely even knows what it is and that it's never, inspired or informed her approach. She could have just said, yeah, it is this legal theory. I've been taught in it. Probably so have you, Senator Cruz, in your legal background. I think it's interesting, whatever. And maybe it's one factor among a million other things for how I look at the world and look at my decision making.
You could say that critical race theory presents some genuine insights into how our legal system operates. It helps to explain, how we arrived at a place where, black people are in prison at a vastly disproportionate rate. The people who helped write the First Step Act, which I believe Ted Cruz voted for, were inspired in part by elements of critical race theory. We should take from every different academic theory what we can and discard the parts that we find not to be useful. You could do some version.
And that
of
would be the answer I suspect she believes.
Right.
I don't believe that critical race theory has absolutely nothing to do with her worldview whatsoever. That's not a believable claim.
I also don't think she's some zealot on the question either.
Sure, I don't think
she's probably looked at him and like, yeah, there's some of this is genuinely accurate.
Right.
And there are other people on the left who are like, the problem with critical race theory is that it centers race, whereas race was developed as a concept in the 17th, 18th century to justify the oppression that was fueled by capitalism and by the development of chattel slavery, and so. It was a product of, so if you get rid of the product, you still have the thing that produced the product to begin with. But it is now so ingrained that it has to be studied on its own. All of those things can be true without saying, yeah, never heard of this, never really studied this thing. So
I don't. So to me, it's a frankly dishonest answer in these kinds of proceedings, which is not good. I mean. Brett Kavanaugh was in not even setting aside the actual accusations, that whole thing. He was you didn't quite remember this calendar date, that kind of stuff.
Right.
Well, he was asserted that he should practice an extreme level of honesty about those kinds of recollections.
Right.
So.
And people should Google Brett Kavanaugh perjury. It's like in his circuit court testimony, he straight up, and there's no question about it, straight up perjured himself. And it's demonstrable, but this isn't quite perjury, but it's not quite honesty either, and it also shows that Democrats feel like they're in retreat on this issue.
Yeah,
that's what it shows. You wouldn't
even
react
acknowledge having heard of this.
When
it's
it was
clearly
developed
the preparation
in elite
she got.
law schools.
Yeah,
right.
That's what she was told.
Right, she was told,
don't even acknowledge ever having heard of this.
Yeah, don't give an inch on this.
Which is pretty telling, like you said.
Right.
It actually shows you how, in a way, these hearings are not great in terms of the public spectacle element. Like Rachel Bovard was saying the other day, and I agree with her in theory that yes, they should face, this is an important job, they should face intense questioning from the Senate. That's the job of the Senate. But because it's public spectacle, and also because the judge is not going to say anything of any interest, is not going to explain what they think about abortion or prayer in school or any issue that is consequential that they might rule on, they're not going to give you any clues into their thinking. So it's kind of pointless. But the point for the senators is to grandstand and appear to be fighting or defending, appear to be doing the thing their supporters want, so that it goes in the clip reel to be played on MSNBC or Fox or wherever their team's viewers reside. And that's the only purpose it serves.
Yeah. And I think particularly after Kavanaugh was confirmed, it's going to be very difficult for any minority to defeat a nominee of a majority party, because Democrats will say Kavanaugh came in here, even aside from the sexual assault allegations, he came in here in this like spitting rage that showed a complete lack of the kind of temperament that you want in a justice, and you guys were fine to confirm him. So therefore, there's very little that Democrats are going to be willing to reject one of their own nominees for, given that. And then once Democrats do that, say, hey, she lied about critical race theory, and she was bad on child sex offenders, and you still voted for her, so we're still voting for our very flawed candidate. So it's going to be a tit for tat, and
no way
anybody can get through it, unless you don't have the majority. And Democrats are not going to have the majority for a very long time, it looks like.
Nope.
So the number of Supreme Court justices might just dwindle. Maybe eventually they'll get back.
There will never be a Supreme Court justice ever again confirmed who belongs to the opposite party of the president and the majority in the Senate. Never.
Well, we'll have to. There will be a new era of politics. We don't know when that'll come, but in this era,
the post-apocalyptic era.
In this era, it probably won't happen.
To the fall of the U.S. government, maybe.
So there'll be a 3-3 Supreme Court eventually. That's the best Democrats can hope for.
Yeah.
3-2 majority.
Oh boy. Well, our rising panel will join us next. Stick around.